Hey, 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 welcome back, audio evangelists. Marek, stycos from Audio Alchemist back on tap with another installment of the Platinum Legacy for you. It is Friday, so there's no reason why you can't grab your favorite beverage and get started. It's 5 o'clock someplace. Today's supersonic guest is an electronic musician and sound designer, one who recognizes no limits or guardrails on his quest for his indefatigable audio exploration. Far-ranging credits like film scoring for Touchstone, sound design for Google, Apple, Sony Media, Audi, BMW, Jaguar, list goes on and on. So straight out of Atlanta, Georgia, please welcome Richard Devine.
How are you guys? I love the intro.
Man, good to see you, brother.
Good to see you too.
Yeah, man. How are things over there in your backyard today? How is the wildlife doing?
Oh, doing good, actually. We're, trucking along here. Same old, same old. Been working and working on a couple sound design projects and stuff. And same old, not much has changed. And thankfully, I know during the whole coronavirus thing, I know a lot of my friends are in not such good situations. I mean, I did have all my shows get canceled for the entire year with no chance to rebook for 2021. I haven't had any requests. I don't know when things are going to go back to normal as an independent artist. So I know that's kind of a scary thing for a lot of people. And
my buddy does shows for artists like Dave Matthews, Fish, and people like that. And he says the calls are starting to come in talking about August. So that's no official information or anything, but at least there's interest in obviously big arena events coming back up. So that was a good sign, I thought, we're looking at what the indicators are. So, okay.
Yeah, that's
all right, man. Well, look, I want to remind our viewers that this is interactive. We're dependent upon you. So post your questions on YouTube, Facebook, wherever you might be tuning in, and we will do our best to answer them. And first off, we're going to be watching a video that we filmed in January, 2019, over at Richard's place, and that's pretty insightful. And then we'll walk through his wiring and signal flow for everybody, and then we'll start taking questions. So that's sort of the order of events. So I think with no further ado, let's rock the video, and then we'll get into some dialogue.
Hi, I'm Richard Devine. I'm an electronic producer from Atlanta, Georgia. And we're here at my studio today talking about how I use the Dangerous system to record and mix my new album that's coming out in November on Time Sig Records. Last year I started working on the record all the way through the dead middle of winter, primarily done on this modular system that you see behind me. So it was a collection of different works where I would hook up various modular systems and that would all share a same clock. And then I would compose the pieces of the entire track, linking all the systems together, and then recording all these multi-track sessions that I would capture with the 2-bus plus and some of the Dangerous stuff, and then mix the record pretty much entirely by hand. I didn't want to use any plugins because I was going for more of a warm organic sound, which kind of gave the whole record this sort of sound that I wanted, which is kind of alien versus predator versus dreamy, sort of deranged, and takes you sort of through every emotion that you can think of. So I took all of the stems from my modular sessions and I played them back through the Convert 8s that you see here, taking 16 channels of audio and then playing all of this out into my 2-bus plus here. 16 tracks being summed into this summing mixer, and then a really fun feature that I like to use with the 2-bus plus is the insert function, which I have actually connected to my liaison that you see here. And the Liaison has got basically all this 500 series rack gear connected to it, which gives me a lot of flexibility to try different combinations of the mic preamps, these different flavored EQs and compressors. And then finally at the end we've got the back EQ for a little bit of final finishing touches to the mix. And then from there I'm capturing everything with the Convert AD Plus that we see over here. For my monitoring situation, I'm using the Convert 2 running in with my Monitor ST. What was really nice is just being able to kind of sit there, turn knobs, push buttons, and kind of dial in sweet spots for each mix and each individual song. I don't think my record would have come out the way that it did had I not had this set up. I wanted complete 100% honest accuracy throughout the entire digital system, and that's what I love about the Dangerous Music Gear, is you get this complete, beautiful hi-fi accuracy.
I remember when we filmed this. Back when people walked the planet without masks on their faces. And we went out for Mexican tacos afterward, Richard, and drank beer and enjoyed ourselves and talked about the good old days.
I miss
Well, we got to do that again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Since that video, my room's changed a little bit since we shot that video. I got rid of my Yamaha mixing console, the digital console I had, which was great. I used it for many years, but I felt it was time to move to a more hybrid setup and to scale things down. And I didn't want a big desk in here anymore. And so, yeah, for those of you who may be watching the video, probably wondering, or if you haven't seen my new updated setup, this is the current new configuration I'm using, which is a combination of different outboard saturation compressors, but most of it is centered around a Dangerous Music Complete music system that you see here. With a couple other additional things. I've got some Manley, got some API in there, Pultex. What else have I got in there? I'm trying to look on the corner here. It's Empirical Labs Fatso, the Black Box HG2, some of the Maslek stuff. A little bit of coloration, saturation, some polishing, mastering tools here, as well as some tools to do some stem processing as well. So I wanted to kind of.
What did you find changed when you got rid of the console? What were there benefits that you felt you were able to achieve, or what were some of the side effects?
Yeah, I really wasn't using the board as much anymore. It was basically just like a hub that I had a lot of gear plugged into. I wasn't particularly a big fan of the internal EQs or the effects on the board. I was using some of the Waves plugins, but they were really dated. A lot of the stuff was really, really old. And it sounded okay, but I felt that I had much better options that were available now. You know, even with some of the plugins that I use these days, there's much better limiters and compressors and EQs. And I'd been slowly kind of going back into the analog world from the digital world within the last like 6-7 years. It was just kind of a personal choice. I just wanted to go back to using physical knobs and using my ears and not looking at a DAW screen and automating plugins the whole time. I really kind of wanted to get back to a more hands-on approach to mixing and tracking duties and stuff here at my studio. So just as an experiment too, I wanted to see if I could get a completely different sound than what I had been, than what I previously achieved with my older records. So this was an exercise in kind of learning the gear, learning how to apply this gear in the context of tracking, recording, and mastering for my own music compositions, as well as a lot of the client sound design work that I have coming in here from day to day. So I was able to use this in both of those situations, and having this setup at least for me, was a lot more, it's easier than having a console where I had all these sends and returns and all these things going to different places. And I wanted to make it more, I wanted to simplify things and kind of step down a little bit and then have more flexibility and coloration options. And I also wanted to be able to use plugins and external hardware in my setup, depending on what the track needs or whatever the composition or the project that I'm working on. I wanted to have the flexibility to have either option, but also have easy access to either one of those options and to be able to A/B them and to make a decision there going with what the final.
Do you feel like the fact that the Dangerous sort of is a ground, lays the ground for transparent foundation, and then because you've been talking about color a lot, adding color, so when you come in and you've got this musical transparency, then you can hear, okay, this is what it sounds like. Now I'm going to make a decision. I want to fuck this up a little bit. You know, I want to have some fun with that. And you can pull out your paint kit. You know.
Absolutely. That's one of the initial first things that drew me to the Dangerous music gear was how transparent every single piece of gear that I have from there is. And my story with Dangerous began with the Monitor ST. That was my first piece of gear. I think I bought it back in, it was either 2011 or 2012. And that was a real sort of, I want to say it was a big turning point for me. Up until that point, I thought I was using a really good, honest, as they claimed, monitor controller. And it's something that I know a lot of people probably neglect or don't think about that much. It was something that I didn't really put much thought into was, you know, my monitoring solution and also a DA converter. I didn't really pay that much attention to how well or how important having a digital analog converter, a good analog digital converter, is to making decisions on things, especially if you're working on audio, sensitive audio material where you need to have really an accurate picture of what's going on. Having a very good, accurate digital analog converter that you can trust is super important. And I kind of learned these things. I always say that I learned these things like painfully. It was like one piece of the gear that I learned. I was like, oh man, I have to get a new DA converter, and then I need a better analog digital converter. So each stage, I was that's how I built my Dangerous system up. I kind of went one piece at a time, and then kind of built the whole system up to where I now have the complete system. You know, I just realized that having all the components is vitally important to getting an accurate picture of what you're doing. And then if you want, you can have the choice to add some coloration, some saturation. You can add those things in, and there's lots of neat features that they've implemented in the system at multiple different stages in the process where you can either blend a specific color or compression, or use a certain flavor of limiter or compressor. You have a lot of great options at each stage, and they're not complex. They're not complex tools to use. They're very easy. I mean, you almost don't even have to look down at the gear to use it, and that's what I love, because I do have some other gear here where you have to really pay attention to what you're doing, or you could really screw some stuff up, and you have to carefully match what's happening on the left side and to the right side. You know, you have 8 to 12 knobs that all have to be at the right indented position. And that's not a bad thing. Of course, you get a lot of control with that. You just have to be really careful. I've made the mistake of, printing a mix and being like, oh shoot, those knobs, I didn't adjust the knobs on the left side to match the right. Like on my massive passive, I do that a lot. If I'm doing a lot of shaping, with that EQ, it can be a little tedious, but it's a wonderful EQ. But yeah, your guys' gear is not.
Tried to design all that gear so that there's no menus. So you don't go down the rabbit hole, right? So it's like there's a button. Okay, I want to change, -14, -16, -18. I don't go into a menu. Then you leave it there, and you're like, oh my god, I ruined this record because I changed the level and I forgot. It's like, no, it's right there in front of you. Just hit a button. So yeah, try to keep it simple, stupid. You can still smoke a joint or drink a beer and operate the products.
That's huge.
I like what you said too about about getting a piece at a time, because a lot of people get intimidated. I mean, myself, for example, right? So when I got into buying gear, I was 21, right? I took a loan from the mafia, couple $1,000, got some money in a shoe, or $4,000 in a shoebox, right, in Boston, and bought myself a SEC 1882 console and a Tascam TRS-8, recorder, reel-to-reel recorder, right? Luckily, I paid them off, so I still have all my 10 digits. But I remember, you always wanted so much more, but you could only afford to. I could only afford to buy what I needed for the session. Like, I remember a hard rock band came in, the drummer was going to have 2 kick drums, so I had to get a second kick drum mic. So the money for the session went towards buying the second kick drum mic. So it was like that. But what's beautiful about that is you really learn, you get intimate with the intricacies of each piece of gear, of its idiosyncrasies also. So like how to make it hurt and how to make it sing for you, So I think a lot of people, they look at Dangerous Music System, it's this huge thing. I'm doomed. I can never get this. Dude, start with one piece. Start with the AD Plus or the Convert 2. Start listening, or when you can't afford it, get a source or whatever. So I think that's an important point you brought up. Before we get too far along, I want you to walk people through signal flow so that we don't lose them along the way. So let's do that, and then I want you to keep talking because you're saying far more interesting shit than I am. So
you're doing fine.
Signal flow. I'll get back to you.
Yeah. So I use Logic, as you can see here. It's my main DAW, and I have the 2 Convert 8s here running via USB connection. So I run 16 channels out from my Convert 8s to a 2-bus plus analog summing mixer that you see here. And from there, I like to go out from that stereo into the Convert AD plus, the analog digital converter. And you can see here to the left is the monitor ST. That's the first piece of gear that I told you guys that I bought. That was my gateway into the dangerous music world. And going from there, I go out AES EBU into my Apollo 16X. And that's what the blue lines are. And then you'll see at the bottom there, I'm also running the Convert 2, which does my D to A back. And my monitor ST is hooked up to my Convert 2. And then I'm able to, accurately hear the final mix of everything, the final playback mix from that. So that's basically the final end stage. And on the Dangerous 2-Bus Plus, I mentioned it in the video, but a key feature that I use is that insert button right there, that green button. And I have that directly inserted to the Dangerous Liaison that you see there. So I have the send and return there, which is great because I can bypass that button. And what I have is the Bax EQ and the Dangerous compressor plugged into the Liaison there. So that gives me the ability to turn on and off a combination of the EQ and compressor all at once by engaging or disengaging the insert button. With a Liaison, there's a whole host of really interesting features that I love about that box. You have an ability to store recall presets, which I use a lot. I have my A-bus chain is basically presets that I use for tracking, like if I'm doing stem processing, if I'm doing one process like a drum track stem or a synth line lead, I'll use that. I have a combination of the Bax and the Dangerous compressor, as well as a bunch of 500 series. I've got a BAE rack that's got a bunch of like Pultex. I've got a Obsidian Dramastic audio compressor. I've got a bunch of API compressors. API EQs, 550, 560s in there, and Pultex, and I think some other stuff that's just linked in there. So I have some coloration options, and you've got these flip buttons that are really cool, so you can swap the order of the routing, because it's a routing matrix. So you can flip the order of if you want to hear an EQ or a compressor pre or post to hear what that sounds like. I get a lot of different options that I can flip through really quickly at the push of a button and do A/B comparison shootouts and try different things. And yeah, it's been a piece of gear that has been awesome for me. You can have up to 6 pieces of outboard gear routed into it. I also love that there's XLR inputs for, because a lot of friends I have come over will bring a piece of gear maybe we want to throw in the mix that I don't have. We'll just plug it in right on the front and try it out and assign it to a channel, and we can use it right away. I think that's incredibly an awesome feature. It just opens up a lot of possibilities. The other feature that I love is the separate parallel processing loop, which allows me to use the original and affected signals blended independently. And there's a big knob that's got the parallel blending knob. So that to me is really wonderful because, for example, I'll always maybe use like my black box HD2 that's like a heavy saturation unit. And I'll put it on the parallel bus, and then I'll just blend in a little bit of that saturation with my unaffected mix. So I can, really, really dial in how much of that sound I want. I also use it with the Pultex, stuff that's got really, really heavy color where you may not want that much color over the entire mix or whatever the stem I'm processing. Sometimes I just want a little bit, like 30–40% of it in, just to give it enough flavor, maybe add a little bit more weight underneath things, bring stuff forward a little bit. It just depends on the application, but it's a really, really handy tool to have at the tracking and at the mastering stage to, if you have other outboard analog gear that has, different coloration or saturation options that you want to be able to really dial in precisely how much of that goes into the mix. But super, super handy, something that I use here all the time. And like I said, you've got your presets to the left there. I use all 4 of those presets. I have the store function, like I said, and when we were going back to it, it's like, this is very simple to use. There's no hidden menus, there's no hidden functions, no LCD screens where you're doing menu diving. Everything you see is absolutely right there in front of you. You either turn on the green button to hear the pieces of gear that are on, that are in the chain, or they're out. It's a very simple process, and this is one of those key pieces of gear that I use pretty much on a daily basis. I mean, pretty much everything I do runs through the Liaison, in the combination of using the backs and the Dangerous Compressor and the backs and going to the back EQ and to the Dangerous Compressor. Those are like my 2 final end polishers, as I call them, mastering end game polishers. They're just nice to stick at the end of the chain, especially the backs. I pretty much use the back EQ on everything I've done in the last probably like 5 years. It's super easy to use. I almost look at it like, it's like the car stereo EQ idea. It's just like that easy. You need a little more mid, a little more high, like, frequency sparkle. You can, it's just the way that it's set up is just extremely, really effective and fast. I don't have to really think about it. Like some of the other EQs that I have here, where I have to really pay attention to where I'm either boosting or cutting frequencies with the back EQ. You've got your low and highs, and you can work from the middle out. You can set your gain stages, and then it's a very, very fluid, easy EQ to work with. Like I said, it's one of those pieces of gear. I almost rarely even have to look down. After been using it for so long, you just get a real sense of how to kind of get right in the sweet spot of what you want. And it's also super transparent. I can see why so many mastering engineers love this EQ, because it really, really doesn't get in the way at all. And really, really, if you need to, shape or kind of mold or shape any of the frequencies in your mix, you can do it and it'll do it complete with just the cleanest cuts. I mean, it just is really phenomenal piece of equipment. It's definitely. You
ever use the backs when you're tracking, or you don't have it wired up like that? Like use the cut filters when you're.
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I use it for stem processing too. Yeah, it just depends. Here, my setup, like I said, I could be doing stereo mastering of stereo tracks, but a lot of time I'm just doing stem processing. So I'll use the Dangerous compressor and the back CQ together. Go into the Dangerous compressor. That's another super flexible piece of equipment that also doesn't take a rocket scientist degree to use. I love it because they've built in so many functions that make it really easy to use, like the auto attack release function, which eliminates just all the guesswork. It's a VCA based compressor, which is like my favorite type. You don't get any type of distortion with this compressor. I've not been able to distort this thing at all. Even with 20 dB of gain reduction, I mean, it's just a beast what it does. And you've got the smart dynamics dual slope detection, which automatically limits peaks while, like just stealthily compressing the average signal. I mean, these functions you guys have added are just brilliant on here. I love the active sidechain send and return function. And sometimes I'll use like my API 560 EQ. I'll send this to the sidechain, and you could do some really cool stuff to make the compressor behave completely differently, or to kind of either compress more of the low frequencies or the high frequencies. You can set the sidechain input to change the way the detector behaves. So it's almost, I don't have any other compressor that does that here. That's a super intelligent function to have in here. So it's like, and also there's the bass cut function, which I use, cuts everything from 60 hertz. So I work on a lot of super bass heavy material impacts, a lot of sound design based stuff. So that's a function that's very important for me. But you got the smart dynamics detection. I talked about that. And the sibilance boost too is really nice, where you get the ultra high, like linear high shelf to push the treble into the detector. So it's I don't know how to describe it. It's probably the most intelligent compressor that I own. Like I said, I don't have another compressor that has these set of unique features that make it really easy to use, and you get a lot of control over what's happening in the mix, and you have really creative ways that you can use this compressor over some of the other compressors that I have here in my studio. So it's especially when you're compressing like high frequencies and low frequencies, and being able to really creatively control those in a way that can really, really drastically change how things are affected at the end stage. So I use it a lot for drum bus processing. Like I'll just take my whole drum bus processing chain and I'll run it through the Dangerous compressor to give it a little more meat. And sometimes it can go to two different extremes too. That's another thing that I really like about it. You can get it to sound like a real grabby, like SSL G-bus compressor if you want, or you could make it almost feel like it's transparent, like it's almost not even there. It's not even in the way, but it's just doing its job, just limiting things a little bit, controlling things if you want. It's just for me, it's such a versatile compressor that it's why I have it in the center. If you saw on my console there, I have it at the top because I spend a lot of time using it. I always put it center and forward because you've got so much control. So yeah, you see it dead center in front at the top there. So I definitely, anything that's kind of immediately in front of me gets quite a use. So I'd say the Dangerous compressor is one of the most widely used compressors in my studio. It's my saluting you guys on that.
The last two people we had, Cheskov with Chris Godby, and then before that, Luca Petalesi, they were both talking about the sidechain function on that, how they use it. And Cheskov was saying I hadn't actually thought of this. He uses plugins. So he actually sends the plugin into the sidechain to affect the behavior of the compressor.
Cool. That's a cool idea.
Interesting application. Yeah, it was kind of neat.
Yeah.
So
well, see, there's really no right. Yeah, there's no right or wrong way. It's just what I always say. I always tell people that don't get caught up in thinking that, oh, this is one way that the mastering engineer did it, so this must be the right way. You should listen to your ears And that should be whatever sounds good and emotionally moves you. That's the right thing to do, no matter what setup you have or what gear you have.
Talk a little bit about that, because when we filmed that piece, obviously you were completing and getting ready to release the last record, and now you just wrapped up your new record, right? So do you want to?
That's right.
Want to wax poetically a little bit about the differences between the two processes with the new system, and then also you had mentioned a bit about this is the first one you ever mastered, so which I found
this one
really cool.
This has been an experiment this year. I just finished up a new acid record that we're going to hope, keep my fingers crossed, is going to come out maybe end of August, somewhere mid-September. We're hoping, if things don't get delayed. We had a little bit of a minor setback at the record pressing plant that shut down for a couple of months during the whole COVID-19. And so they just recently opened back up, so we were able to resume getting back working on the record. And we just finished the mastering, or I finished the digital masters, and then I had the help of Bob Weston and the guys at Chicago Mastering helped me do the vinyl masters. I always get a second engineer, mastering engineer. I always, I say that I do try to do an honest master myself, but I always feel that it's good to get a second pair of ears to listen to your stuff, to make sure there was anything that you didn't miss, because it's something that I feel is important, and they can always catch things that you may not, because as a person that creates the music, sometimes you are blind to things that might have been there right at the beginning of the tracking process, and you might have just not noticed things, and that happens to me a lot. So I have a lot of reminders that show me things like, where's my phase at? Am I, I'm running an RTA the whole time. Am I getting some bass frequency buildup here or somewhere? Just things that kind of constantly remind me to pay attention to specific things as I'm working, because sometimes it's easy to lose sight of that. So I try to set up things that help me out in that regard. And with this most recent record, I actually did all the digital mastering on my own with the Dangerous Music System. I wanted to just see, as an experiment, to see how close I could get to mastering a record that on my own. And I'm not claiming to be a mastering engineer. There's amazing mastering engineers out there that would probably do a much better job than me. But I just wanted to, just for fun, why not? It's my record, right? If I screw it up, I screw it up. But if it sounds good, it sounds good. And I'll learn some things, right? That's how I've always done things in life, is just by doing them. It's one thing to just, talk about stuff, but it's another thing to just do it. And you might fall down a few times, you might fail, you might screw some stuff up, but you learn. You learn from those mistakes, and those make you grow as a person, and you evolve, and you take that information and you apply that into your next project, and it only makes you progress further. So this to me has been an accumulation of a lot of things. So this record is a bit different than my last record, in that was using a little bit different equipment. So it was more like capturing a live show, like a live performance, whereas my last record was I spent a lot of time pre-setting, setting up these systems where I, had spent weeks setting up the patch, and then I would perform through the patch. It was a lot of preparation, a lot of notes and things. And I was, had very little things that would happen at each stage. With this most recent record, which is not really an album, it's an EP. It's about 46 minutes of new music. It's 4 tracks. And this would be considered, I would say this is like an acid record. I think a lot of people have been curious because I've been kind of sneaking little things here and there on my Instagram, on my social media feeds, of some of these tracks I've been working on. But I've kind of wanted to revisit creating acid music, which I haven't made in 25 years. So I just had this idea. It's like, well, what would a acid record sound like today if I were to make it with some different equipment than what I had when I was, at my parents' house when I was like 17, 18 years old, when I had completely different gear. I didn't have much knowledge of what I was doing at the time. I had really
and you were recording in the program called Acid back then, probably, right?
I didn't even
program called Acid existed.
There is, yeah. No, I didn't even. I was recording to DAT at that time, DAT, digital audio tape, and I'm sure people out there are probably like, "What?" Yeah, I was recording to cassette and DAT tape. So Yeah, I still have my Panasonic SV 3700 DAT recorders. Those are what I used to record to. So I used to have a big analog desk that the main outputs would run directly into my my DAT recorder, and that's how I used to record my stuff. And then I had all my hardware plugged into a 32-channel analog mixing desk, and then I had like a couple effects processors in there. Yeah, I think it was like a Yamaha SVX90, an Eventide H3000. Bunch of old stuff that I was using back then. I think, yeah, I sold some of it. I wish I kept my H3000. I sold that when I'd love to get that back again. But yeah, I was using that setup back then to record the record. So it was an interesting exercise to create an acid record with today's equipment in my mindset of today. So it was kind of like, let's revisit that, but do something different. Maybe push the sound in a different way. And do something new and interesting, or at least for me, it was an exercise.
What did you find? What did you discover from it? Tell us, man, we're waiting. What's the magic?
Well, for me, it was great. It was, like I said, my last record, Sort Lave, I used the Dangerous Music System to do the tracking and the mastering and summing and the day-to-day sort of like, ins and outs of putting that record together was like one of the first exercises I did on that. So this one was like chapter 2. Now I really know the system very well. I've used it for a few years now. I've discovered some new tricks. I now know what some great combinations are. Added some even more pieces of kit in here into the Dangerous system. So I've got more options for, really, really shaping things and getting things exactly the way I want. So I can really have full control over how everything sounds in the mix. And for me, the really important things I wanted to focus on was getting sounds that sound really polished, punchy. They sound great on every system that you play them on. That you're getting like a really good translation on a, really cheap, crappy, small speaker to like maybe like a Sonos single speaker, or to a sound bar, or all the way up to like a stereo hi-fi system, your car, or like a Function One live PA rig. Like I have spent lots of time trying out different pieces of gear over the past few years to really, really try to get a system for me that would translate exactly what I'm creating in this room out into the real world. I think that was my main goal. And for the most part, I think I've really succeeded at that. I've gotten a lot of great feedback from a lot of people that had bought my last record. And, I know I've done it when people are saying, hey, Rich, I tripped balls eating mushrooms to your album this weekend and listened to your album on a BMW hi-fi system. It blew my mind away. I know I've done my job. if you're wanting to eat,
you're the guy making the sounds in that BMW too, right? So you're making, right? You're designing sounds for what, 5 or 6 different car manufacturers right now? So,
yeah,
so you got them on both sides. You're making the music for it and you're designing the sound.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I think that's great. I think that if people want to listen to your record in these, and like an altered state or on some really crazy cool sound system, they get excited that so much time was put into the record, the mixing, and I really tried to pay really close attention to every detail to make sure that you're getting a lot of depth and you're almost hearing every like particle, all the layers are really separated, and, this 3D-ness, I really tried to create, I spent a lot of time trying to create that. And that's where I feel that the Dangerous Music System really shined and helped me out in that aspect, as compared to some of my older records that were done in the box. And that's not a bad thing. It's just what I was using at the time. But it kind of goes back to this idea, like I did this comparison. I was going back to my older recordings when I was recording with that analog mixing desk, 32-channel mixing desk. I remember listening to these old DATs, and back then when I was recording on that desk, I wasn't, flattening a whole mix down by bouncing a bunch of tracks down. It was just recording all of these tracks open on these analog channels, right? So what I noticed on those old recordings, on those DAT tapes, I was like hearing the separation between the instruments. I was like, wow, listen to these recordings sound great. I mean, they're from like the 90s going into like the early 2000s, but it was definitely noticeable. I remember doing comparisons back to my tracks that I was doing in the box, like mid 2000s, early 2000s, when stuff started to really go in the box, Pro Tools and Cubase and a lot of these DAWs. A lot of people started producing in these DAW environments and bouncing and stuff. And the thing I noticed was the instrument separation. I wasn't getting that same three-dimensional quality that I was getting when I was just using that old analog desk. So I was thinking, and I was it started to bother me a bit. I was like, I kind of miss that sound. Honestly, to me, sounded more pleasant to me when I was listening to stuff, was the earlier stuff. And then when I, was doing the A/B comparisons, like I need to figure out a way to build a system where I get back to utilizing a analog summing setup like I had back in the 90s, but having an analog summing setup that also utilizes the best of the newest, latest digital technology. And I was thinking, well, what system would allow me to get that? And that's when I looked at your guys' stuff, I was like, well, the Dangerous music system, like the 2-bus plus here. This is now what I do all my analog summing in is in this box. And it's an incredibly awesome box. Talk about getting tons of headroom. You've guys got the 3 coloration knobs, which are just super awesome. I love that you guys have added this in the. And once again, it's simple to use. You don't have to use all of these features. These are simply things you can turn on or off. Like I use the harmonics knob. I love that. It kind of gives you that just slightly saturated, distorted sound if you want to really, really give you the, you can get a perfect mixture of the odd and even order harmonics. And it's just, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's really, really, really nice top end. You could get like this really simmery, it's just even great on bass sounds as well. It's just great. The parallel limit is awesome too, because I don't own an 1176 limiter. I would love to have one, but this one is kind of gives me that flavor. It's like the FET limiter that's just kind of, I've always, one of them, but it's nice to have it as a single knob, just kind of blend in just how much you want. It's just an amazing feature to have. The X-Former knob too, another one that I use a lot. I think if I remember, it's a Cinematic Transformers that they used in this, but it's it gives you just solid punchiness of like, what my older analog desk gave me, which I miss so much. This kind of brings back a little bit of that flavor that I liked. And it's just brilliant. I actually had the 2-bus LT, which was the previous generation model that you guys released that I still have here. I actually have it linked with my 2-bus plus, but those three analog tone circuits you guys have added is just, it's brilliant. Yeah, it's awesome. Like for somebody like me who's trying to get back into the analog world again, just taking baby steps back in, and those features just really, hit it on the mark for me. Trying to get back to that sound, and on top of the summing, which is already spectacular.
I want to get some of these questions that people are asking in here. Otherwise, you and I are just going to hang out and drink beer. So. Kyle asks. Kyle asks. Yeah, exactly. I need to get a refill myself. All right. What was the most complex sound you ever made? What was the most complex sound you ever made from Kyle?
Oh boy. I would have to say one of the most complex, difficult sounds I had to make was probably the exterior engine sound for Jaguar's I-Pace electric vehicle. That was a very challenging, scary job. And I had to meet multiple different points of expectations from the branding division at Jaguar, and also the sound itself also had to meet certain legislative protocols where it had to sit in a certain frequency range. I also had to design the sound that had to work to a proprietary speaker that was this very strange speaker that had a very limited frequency response at 4 of these speakers. So there were a lot of limitations in the hardware and in the software. So I was kind of climbing this uphill battle to try to achieve the sound, working with very strange hardware and software limitations and speaker limitations to create a sound, to make it sound convincing, like it was coming from the car. Well, like we're trying to design a sound that's not there. There's just silence. So I had to create something that was convincing when you're accelerating on the gas pedal or deaccelerating to alert pedestrians or people that may not be able to see the vehicle at a certain distance, to be able for them to perceive the sound coming to them. They're like, oh, that's a car coming. I need to step back and onto the sidewalk or move away. So
I remember you had to fight with it, or not fight with, but on the board you had this wide age range, right? So you had the guys that had been at Jaguar forever that were saying, it's a sophisticated, throaty sound. And then you had the people that are like, yeah, man, I want this to kick ass. Right? The younger people.
It's sort of
bridge that delta now.
Yeah, it was tough. It was tough. Yeah, I worked with, it was interesting. The people who hired me were very young. They were the new technical specialist team. They're all younger generation people working at JLR, Range Rover in England. But the company's been around for over 75 years. So there's lots of the higher up levels of corporate levels that it had to go through and get approvals. And I could see that, it was kind of a difficult time. I know a lot of car manufacturers are shifting from combustion-based vehicles to electric-based vehicles. So it's presenting a whole new set of problems, things that weren't there, 4 or 5 years ago. Now we have to create sounds for these cars that don't make a sound. So because in England, when I mentioned it before, they passed a legislative law. I think it was back in 2011. So all electric vehicles in the UK have to emit a sound up to like 150 feet away. I think from what the specification said in the document when we were designing the sound. And so it had to meet that. And it also had to sit in a certain frequency range so that people that can hear, but maybe they're hard of hearing, that could still hear the car coming. So there were lots of strict requirements that it had to meet, which made it very difficult.
So
and then when you have
cars, I was looking forward to this quiet, you're camping and you look out on the highway and there's no sound from it. But no, Richard, I'm glad it's in your hands instead of some diabolical, skullduggerous individual. So I know that there'll be good sounds, at least, that'll be pouring off that highway. So, here's another question from Jesse Fox. What kind of latency issues do you have to overcome, if any, with your massive modular setup? So any latency issues with your modular setup?
That's interesting. I've not run into really any latency issues with my system. I guess that depends on how nitpicky you are. I'm pretty nitpicky on timing, like sequencer timing and stuff like that. And I do, I use a lot of buffered mults, so I get really strong control voltage signals, whether it's gates or control voltages across the system. I try to ensure stuff that's like, I'm not using like stackables anymore. I use just all direct cable connections to make sure everything's like a solid, especially when it comes to clock sequencers, anything that's receiving pitch or, really, really important foundational stuff within the patch. I just move back to really solid, patch cables and buffered mults that are powered so that everything's getting a solid, clean signal and there's no slew or lag or anywhere in the system. But I have not personally run into anything like that with my modular. But then again, everybody's system's different. My system, when people come here and see the way I have my stuff set up, they call it it looks like a Frankenstein cacophony of madness. I have friends that come look at, my room and they're like, I don't know how you work with that. Like, what is even happening over here? It's, Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. I guess there's a method to my madness, but yeah, I've not run into any latency issues. As far as like tracking and recording goes, like I use two of the N2WS modules that take basically 16 inputs. I have two of those that I can run up to 32 inputs, and then that's all DB25 cables that go directly into an Apollo to Apollo 16X UAD interfaces I have here. So I haven't really noticed any latency in that regard, whether audio tracking or even in the system itself. So I don't know. That's just from my experience.
Good. It's interesting. You've got two people asked here about MS. Kyle and Andrew Shaw. Andrew Shaw. He's our buddy. He's out there. Love you, Andrew. All right. Could you explain how you would use mid-side processing? Any creative tips? And Andrew asked, do you use any? So essentially, if you use any, and any creative tips or how you use it.
Yeah, I actually have been experimenting a bit with mid-side processing. I have two pieces of gear here that I've been playing around a little bit. I have the Clariphonics MS EQ, which has a mid-side matrix in it that you can send anything to. Currently, right now, I have my API 2500 compressor routed to it. And just for fun, I'm just experimenting with it. I've been getting some really, really cool results because I've been a big fan of mid-sides from the microphone recording side since like the early 2000s. I think the first microphone I bought was a Neumann RSM 191. For those of you guys who don't know that, it's a mid-side shotgun stereo condenser mic that I use a lot to record sound effects, and it comes with this MS decoder box where you can adjust the width, and you see the polar pattern on the mic. You can adjust it wide or make it narrow, and then you can adjust the degree. So you get a lot of control when you're out in the field of, like, if you want to reject a lot of stuff on the sides or capture something that's in the middle, or when I got that microphone, it just blew my mind away. I was like, wow, this is the first microphone that's, I just never had anything that had that much control. Fast forward now, we have a lot of mid-side processors. I just bought the SPL Gemini mid-side processor, which is a mid-side processor mastering rack. I have it here at the bottom of my rack. I just bought it. I probably had it like 5 months. So after my initial test playing around with the Clariphonics MS, I was blown away by how three-dimensional you could, like, maybe you wanted to just EQ the outer edges of something. You can really kind of get inside a mix and, like, sometimes, like, bring things inside from out using mid-side compression. I like using it with a multiband compressor. I've been using it with the Maslek MLA4. I've been using the SPL Gemini. I've been experimenting. I know you can screw things up too. Let's not say that this is. I've definitely been playing around with mixes where I've definitely screwed things up. But as far as using it creatively, it's really cool as far as what I've been discovering. And like I said, it's been more of a newer addition to my setup, and I'm kind of playing around now with doing more mid-side mastering, on some of my drum tracks and on my master bus to bring a little more three-dimensionality to the mix, more depth in an interesting way, especially with like a multiband compressor, kind of like playing around in the field and seeing what happens. So it's like I said, it's for me, I tell people all the time that I'm not a master of anything. I'm just a student in class. So I'm, currently in class learning and applying those techniques as we speak and just seeing where it goes. And so far, it's been really fun and interesting. And who sees, I might be incorporating a lot more of this technique in a lot of my future recordings. But it is something that I am studying and trying out at the moment.
Sometimes it's also cool to add excitement, right? So you can narrow or widen the, whatever the drum tracks or the vocals or the guitars or the synths can all sort of bloom in a hook and then shrink back down in a verse. So it's fun for those kind of things. We have to answer this because it's from one of my fellow Greeks, and he says, I want to know about the final export or recording sample rate settings. I think what he's asking for is, how do you some people bounce to disk, some people burn the track. How do you do what's your process to get your final mix down track, final?
I do it pretty much kind of going back to the whole analog mixing board idea. I play the mix through the summing mixer and capture it being played in real time. I don't want to lately I've not been bouncing anything. I just record it in real time being played through the analog summing mixer, and it just records on a separate track as I play through it. And to me, that, in my opinion, with my ear judgment, has given me much better results than just bouncing stuff down in the computer. Because I look at it like Photoshop layers. You have a bunch of layers all open, and then you flatten it down to one image, and that's fine for most purposes. That's great. With my music, I have a lot of there's a lot of like detailed, tiny micro macro complexities. A lot of like particle, tiny sounds, and little tiny things that can get sometimes smeared and lost in the mix. And I've just found that summing everything and just recording it in real time, just playing everything in real time and then recording it in one take has been the best way to capture it. So I just capture it that way without, bouncing everything down. And to me, you get much better instrument separation. The image and depth quality is there. All of the stuff that I loved about mixing and recording on an analog desk, I'm getting with this setup by recording in that way, in that setup. So that's typically how I've been doing stuff with my own music and stuff like that. If I'm working with a client who doesn't care that they're not as picky as I am when it comes to, the final mastering stage, I'll just bounce in the box, or if we're dealing with, super tight deadlines, then I'll do stuff in the box and do in the box bouncing. Just depends on the application and what the client wants. But for my own personal music, I do it that way because I like personally the way it sounds. I think it sounds better to my ears.
Thank you, brother. Well, I think we're rounding up into our hour here, so I want to thank you for taking the time and always sharing the magic that you're doing over there. Somebody did ask about when your new record's coming out, but I think you mentioned that you're hoping for September, right? So that's get your fingers crossed.
We're hoping.
Yeah, okay, all right. So we've answered that question.
Yes.
And I want to throw out some props for our next event, next Platinum Legacy. We're featuring the Grammy Award-winning Pablo Araya, my Bolivian brother out there. And so that's going to be actually on a Thursday, not a Friday. So Thursday, June 25th, coming up. So please tune in for that and bring your excellent questions. We'll be posting the diagram for Richard's signal flow on our Facebook page there, so you can follow those. I'm trying to convince my director of digital marketing, Maven, activities to start some page with all these things, so you can go up afterwards and click and find out, sort of the secrets behind what's happening out there, and perhaps we can update them as time goes on. But Richard, man, dude, it's always such a good time to hang with you, and I always learn something, and it's always fun. And so we got to do it for real in the flesh here soon enough.
Oh, I hope.
All right. Okay, man, well, take care and have a kick-ass weekend.
You too, everybody. Have a great weekend.